In Hawaii.
We are talking about Samuel, and let's just do a review of what's happened in Samuel's life. Who remembers how Samuel was born? Somebody just shouted out.
Yes.
Go ahead, Lilia.
He was a miracle baby. The Lord did a miracle in his mama's tummy after she cried out to him. And he was born.
There you go.
She dedicated him to the Lord.
Yes.
Go ahead, Maria.
No, his mom couldn't bear the children for a long time. And then she prayed to God. She went to the Heli, you know, the
Eli the priest.
Eli.
Yeah, yes. And she prayed so deeply and she cried at the same time and asked so much. And the Heli, he prayed for her that the God can hear her voice and bless her with the child.
Yes. And she had a son and gave him to the Lord. And how many other children did she have? Who remembers how many sons she had?
I think 3 sons, 2 daughters.
3 sons, and how many daughters?
I think 2 daughters.
2 daughters. So she had a total of 6 kids. 5 extra kids besides Samuel would make 6.
Yes.
And then the Lord called Samuel when he was asleep. And how many times did the Lord call Samuel before he responded? 3 times. And then the 4th time, before God called him the 4th time, Eli said, Samuel, if he calls you again, say, speak, Lord, because your servant is listening. And the story says that the Lord stood right in front of Samuel's bed and spoke, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, who remembers?
Speak, your servant.
Speak, your servant listens. And we thought it was very interesting that he didn't say, speak, Lord, because he didn't know the Lord yet. And so he simply said, speak, which is very interesting. And then the children of Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. Did they ask Samuel, who was recognized as a prophet, about that battle first? No, they did not, and they were defeated. So what did they take with them to the battle the next time? They took with them the good luck charm of the Ark of the Covenant, or at least they thought it was a good luck charm, right? Did that help them? No, they were defeated. The Ark of God was captured. How many years was the Ark of God away from the house of the Lord?
20.
20 years. Samuel was preaching from Dan to Beersheba, and all of Israel yearned after the Lord. And so Samuel brought them all to Mizpah and prayed for them. And while Samuel was offering a sacrifice to the Lord, who attacked?
The Philistines.
The Philistines attacked, and Samuel ran for his life because he was frightened. No, Joan is shaking her head no. Tell us what happened, Joan.
He just kept offering the sacrifice.
Right, and the Lord shouted with a big shout over the Philistines, and they fell down in fear. They ran away. What did the children of Israel do?
Follow them.
That's right, chased them, killed them all the way to Gath. And then the children of Israel had some cities restored. Does anyone remember the names of the cities? From Ekron to? Gath, that's right. Those cities were restored and the territories were restored, and it was like the golden age of the judges. And Samuel went preaching in a circuit. It was really cool. Okay.
I remember reading today I was reading the book of Samuel, and I read the last chapter of the first book of Samuel about Saul tragically dying.
Yes.
I didn't remember that, even though I read the Bible a lot when I was growing up.
Okay.
And that just kind of like is with me now. And I think that there are a lot of desperate people in the world, and that we can all get to that point where we feel like, why go on? And then we just have to be patient and wait on the Lord to take care of us and not give up.
That's absolutely right. Now, in this particular story of the life of Samuel, Saul was anointed king, but Saul sinned against the Lord, and the Lord rejected him from being king. And the Lord said to Samuel, Samuel, go to Bethlehem to Jesse, who is a leader and recognized as a very important man in Bethlehem. And he has 8 children, and I have preserved for myself a king among his children. And so Samuel went, and he took the elders of Bethlehem to Jesse's house. And Jesse's son, the firstborn, came out named Eliab. And this is where our story starts today. And Samuel said when he saw Eliab, certainly the Lord's anointed is standing before him.
That's good.
And the Lord said to Samuel, Samuel, don't look at his appearance, yet how tall and strong he looks, because I have rejected him. Because the Lord does not see the way people see. Because people only see what's in front of their eyes, but the Lord sees the heart. So Jesse sent the next son, Abinadab, in front of Samuel. And Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen him either. And then Jesse sent the next son, Shammah, in front of Samuel. And Samuel said, the Lord has not elected him either. And 7 sons passed in front of Samuel. And Samuel said, the Lord has not elected any of them. And then Samuel said to Jesse, Jesse, are these all your sons? And Jesse said, the youngest, he's out taking care of the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send for him, because we will not sit down to eat until he comes. And Jesse sent for his youngest son, and the youngest son came. And when the youngest son came in, the Lord said to, and he was blonde and good looking and had a pretty face, or handsome face, I guess you would say. And the Lord said to Samuel, Samuel, get up, anoint the youngest son, because he is the one. Samuel got up and took his horn of oil and anointed the youngest son in front of all of his brothers. And later, Samuel got up and went back home to Ramah. And that's the end of our story. Isn't that an interesting story?
It's an interesting story. Very
Yes.
interesting story.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate that. Now, would anyone like to volunteer to try to repeat whatever they remember from that story, starting with where Samuel says, surely the Lord's anointed is standing right in front of
Me.
him. Who said him? I heard it. I heard it.
I said me.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Claudia. See if you can get the rest of that story in.
Well, he said that people look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. And he said, this isn't the one. And then he sent the next son. Can't remember his name. Eliab was the first. I don't remember the name of the second one.
Okay.
One of them's named Shammah, isn't it? Yeah. Anyways, he went through 7 sons. Nope, none of these. Where do you have any more kids? And he said, my youngest is out in the field watching the sheep, so we won't eat until you get him. And they brought him.
Okay.
And he was anointed.
There you go. Let's give Claudia a big round of applause. Huh? She did really good.
Way
Come
to
on, let
go,
me see
way
those
to
hands
go.
going. Way to go, Claudia. Yeah, that's exactly right. You got a lot of those details in. 7 sons for sure. And
Yeah.
Eliab and Shammah, and the name of the other one was Abinadab.
It's been a
And
dab,
those are not common names like John, Harold, and George. You know? So thank you for sharing with us. I appreciate that. Let's tell the story together. You guys can help me, okay? Now, when Eliab came in front of Samuel, who remembers what Samuel said? Surely the Lord's
anointed.
The Lord's anointed is in front of him. And the Lord
Ending
said,
before me.
yes, that's right. And so the Lord said to Samuel, Samuel, don't look on his
Appearance.
appearance or how.
Look on outward appearances.
Oh,
Right.
he is.
That's right. How tall he is. Very
How
good.
tall.
Thank you, Lilia. Yeah, how tall he is. Thank you, Lilia. Because I have
Rejected him.
rejected him.
Good.
Because the Lord does not
Look.
see or look the way people see, because people see only what is in
front of their eyes.
in front of their
Outward.
eyes. But the Lord, where does the Lord look?
Looks at the heart.
The heart.
The heart.
The
That's
heart.
right. It's at the heart. And so Jesse made another one of his
Sons.
sons pass in front, and the son's name was Abinadab. And the Lord said, I have not
Chosen him.
chosen him. That's right. And so Jesse made another son pass in front of him, and his name was Sama. And the Lord said,
Haven't chosen him.
I have not chosen him. And so how many sons passed in front of Samuel?
7.
7 sons passed in front of Samuel. And Samuel said, the Lord has not
7.
Chosen.
chosen or elected, actually. The Lord has not elected any of them. And then Jesse said to his sons, kill him. He's turned us all into terrible people.
No.
He didn't say that? Oh,
Yeah.
what did Samuel
No.
say to Jesse?
Don't you have another son?
Are these all your sons? And
All your
Jesse said,
sons?
The
the
youngest is in the
The
field
youngest
taking
is-
care of the sheep.
taking care of the sheep. And Samuel said, send for him, because we won't
Eat.
sit down to eat until he comes. So Jesse sent for his youngest son. And when the youngest son came, he was, what color was his hair?
Rubia.
Blonde.
Blonde. He was blonde, and he was
Handsome
looking.
looking.
handsome, and he had a good looking,
Beautiful eyes.
Face.
beautiful face, and
Oh.
handsome face. I don't know, kind of like when I see in a mirror, I guess. I don't know. And what did the Lord tell Samuel?
Anoint him. He's the one.
Stand up,
Right.
anoint him. He's the one. And so Samuel
Fine.
came and took his hoard of oil, and he anointed him in the middle of his
Brother.
brothers. Later,
Presents.
Samuel
Got up.
got
Went
up
home.
and went home to Ramah. That's right. Let's give ourselves an applause. Huh? You guys did great. Everyone to close their eyes for a second. Close your eyes. Close your eyes for a second. Everybody close your eyes. Close your eyes. Now, we know who this young man is because we've read the Bible, right? And I want you to forget everything you know about the Bible right now. And I want you to think as just a reader of this story 2,000 years ago, almost 3,000 years ago. The name of this young man anointed to be king is not in this story. And we don't find out about him for another chapter and a half, what his name is. We all know his name is David. What do you think people who read this story without any knowledge of the Bible might think right now, not knowing this young man's name? Someone just tell me what you might think. You can open your eyes now. What might someone who has no knowledge of the Bible reading this story, what might not having this young man's name do to them? How might they feel?
Maybe like he wasn't that important after all.
Wow, like he wasn't important. Wow, that's very interesting.
His father didn't bother bringing him in, and they didn't bother giving his name.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how might, yeah, go ahead. Who said something? Somebody said something.
No, I just noticed that they didn't mention him even, yes?
They did
So
not
the
mention
Samuel
his
have
name.
to ask, is someone else? You have somebody else?
You know, we know who
Me.
this young man is from two chapters from now, but go ahead, Virginia.
In their culture, usually it's the firstborn who's recognized and who has all the credits. He was the youngest, so maybe his name was not mentioned.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a very important part of the story that I will need to add to you, is that after Samuel anointed this young man, the Spirit of the Lord came on him, from that day forward. What did the Spirit of the Lord do?
Came on
Came
him.
on him from that day forward. Do you think the readers of this story who don't know the story, because we know the story, right? We know the story. We know what's the name of the young man?
David.
David. He kills a
David.
giant in another chapter or two. That's right. And do you think they might be curious? Interesting, huh? What might we learn about God, that God would keep David's name out of this chapter of the Bible?
But he has vision beyond what we have.
Oh, what do you mean by that, Nick? That's kind of interesting. Nick, you want to tell me a little bit more about that? That's kind of interesting.
Well, he might be able to see past the present and he sees the potential in the man that we don't necessarily have vision, have a handle on.
Very interesting. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. Yeah, what do y'all think about that? That's kind of an interesting thought. The Lord has vision that we don't have a handle on.
The Lord has plans for, for the earth, for the people, for the nations.
Okay. Anyone else want to say something about that? Yeah, go ahead, Angelina.
I find it interesting that 7 were rejected and he was chosen.
Yes.
So I kind of feel like there's an emphasis on he was chosen. It was like highlighted.
Yeah.
He was the one chosen by God. So it is God who chooses, it is God who elects, and it is somebody whose name we don't know right now. It's interesting, the first 3 sons' names were given.
That is interesting.
The father's name was given.
Yes.
And but not David and not the other younger sons. So I find it interesting that for me, God is more interested in the right man with the right heart who was working at that time, right? He was busy working.
He was taking care of sheep.
Yeah, exactly. So God was interested in somebody who's busy already and who's using his time wisely.
Wow.
And so it's for me, it's the act of God working. That's why maybe the name right now of David is not that important.
Well, God used people to write the Bible. Could God have told someone to put David's name in there so that we know exactly who he's talking about?
Yeah.
Cheryl?
Well, maybe it wasn't important because maybe God just wanted to emphasize that he was just a very simple shepherd, young boy, the youngest that his dad didn't think would be a king for sure. And maybe he just wanted to emphasize that, and then show, after the Holy Spirit came on him, the potential and how he started, making him into, not that he wasn't useful before, but I guess just showing that, God uses the least of us and for his glory.
Okay. The story goes that Samuel said, surely the Lord's anointed is in front of him when he saw Eliab. And the Lord said to Samuel, Samuel, don't look on his appearance or on how tall he is. because I've rejected him, because the Lord doesn't see like people see. People see what's in front of their eyes, but the Lord looks on the heart. And Angelina mentioned the heart issue here. And earlier we noticed that God told Samuel, I have reserved for myself a king among the sons of Jesse. So what might we learn about God? That the external is not important to him, but the heart is important to God. Someone help me understand that.
Do you think it might have anything to do with that scripture that says we see in part and we know in part?
What do you mean by that? That's very interesting.
Well, that's in, Corinthians, and it says we see in part, we know in part, but when that which is perfect is come, we will know as we are known. And so the Lord sees perfectly and we just see the part.
So what did God see in David?
He probably saw the whole life instead of just the moment,
So Eliab was good looking apparently and big, probably husky. But the Lord said, I've rejected him.
He did not have the right heart.
Mm-mm.
David has a servant heart. David had a servant heart, but not Eliab.
Yeah, because you said he was working.
Mhm.
Could the Lord look differently? Could the Lord look on the outside as well as look on the heart?
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Andrew?
Yes, I can hear you. Who is this?
This is Alex.
Hello, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm joining without video via phone number. First time I've done it. That's why I'm late.
Okay.
Anyway, David it's true he was working, but he was working keeping sheep, which was not, I think the story says, but when Jesse tells Samuel, yeah, there's another one, but he's keeping sheep. And keeping sheep was not a very high position in those days. Shepherds were not, it just wasn't an honorable position. So, I mean, the inference that Jesse has, not only is he not here, but, I don't think you'd want to look at him. He's keeping the sheep. I mean, he's not worthy to look at.
And Jesse doesn't even mention his name. He just says the youngest.
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's true.
Yeah. Wow, that's really.
So he's got two strikes against him. Not only is he the youngest, but he's out keeping sheep.
And the story just later mentions that he's a good-looking boy, but he's a boy. So he's got 3 strikes against him, really, I guess.
Maybe he was busy killing a bear.
Oh, well, that's not in this chapter. That's in another chapter where he does mention he killed at least 1 bear and at least 1 lion. We don't know how many he killed, which is quite a feat for a young boy. So what impact did big physical features have on God from Jesse's sons?
No impact whatsoever.
No impact at all.
Nope.
What did impact God, Steve?
It had to have been David's heart. I think no matter how old and how mature we get, it is so difficult to not see an outward stature and appearance and accomplishments. And God, it was almost as if it was just the opposite. He was choosing one who was younger. He was choosing one who was doing a work that was humble. And he was choosing one who wasn't even named to be the king of Israel. I think it's just such a contrast from the way, even today in the 21st century, the way we think and the way we observe and the way we perceive people.
Wow. Does that tell us anything about God? That he doesn't care at all about one's physical skills or lack of them, but he looks at the heart of the person.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Virginia.
Yeah. There's a verse that I can't remember where in the New Testament, from out of the heart, life
Galatians.
flows from the heart, something like that. So that's why God looks at the heart. So
I believe that's in Galatians 5.
Galatians 5, is it?
Well, that's very interesting. You know, so Jesse had his next son, Abinadab, pass in front, and the Lord says, I've not chosen him to Samuel. And then Jesse has his next son, Shammah, pass in front of Samuel, and the Lord says to Samuel, I've not elected him. And then all 7 sons eventually pass in front of Jesse, and the Lord says, I've not elected any of them. That might be a little harsh on Jesse, huh?
Oh,
Go ahead, Nick. You were saying something?
yeah, I was wondering what the Lord's criteria was. I mean, you know, certainly we look at people's pedigree, their abilities, their strengths, their intelligence, their, you know, but Lord looked at something else, obviously.
Well, that's a really good observation. Yeah. Alex, your screen is lighting up. Did you want to say something?
No, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I'm just making too much noise.
You know, it's kind of interesting because the Lord did not tell Samuel, this is the plan I have. You're going to go straight to the sheepfolds and anoint David and then go home. He didn't tell him anything. He just said, go, and I've reserved for myself a king among his sons. And, you know, that doesn't seem fair to Samuel, does it?
I think that's the life of a prophet.
And it certainly doesn't seem fair to Jesse or to any of his 7 sons that I've rejected you, I've not elected you, I've not chosen you. What might we learn about God that he would not reveal his plans so simply, so quickly?
He loves a cliffhanger.
He loves a cliffhanger. That's pretty good. That's pretty good, man.
Well, he is God. He's God, and you know, we are not. And he's got a plan, and his plan is often different than the way we would plan it. We would pick the biggest, oldest, strongest one that just makes sense to us. God does things differently.
Yeah. You know, go ahead. Virginia, go ahead.
I think our natural tendency is to know everything. We plan ahead of time and all, but God has his own timing. He has his own plans. So this really changes the minds of Jesse and Samuel, that they have to keep in step with God's timing and God's plan. I'm sure they wanted to know more, but that was just what God revealed, I think.
Well, you know, God could have revealed his plans, couldn't he? Could he have done something different there? Cheryl?
When he tells Elijah what to do, he gives him exactly what to do. When he's up on the mountain and he's, you know, go anoint this person, go tell this person this, it was very clear. So he can do it any way he wants.
Cheryl, what were you going to say? Thank you, Claudia.
Well, maybe in the way he did it, it made it really clear to Jesse and to his sons that God wanted that David was the one. Because I mean, if he had just gone and said, you know, I'm supposed to come and anoint David. I mean, maybe the sons could have thought, well, if he had taken a good look at me, you know, I could be a good king. But each one went through the process of standing there and being, even though it sounds harsh, being rejected of God for the, not as a person completely, but to be the king. So maybe that way made it really clear, and to the dad, that was who was supposed to be anointed.
Wow, that's really interesting. What do y'all think about that? That's a really interesting observation. Made it very clear to Jesse and to the 7 sons and to the elders of Bethlehem as well. What do y'all think about that?
Sounds good.
I know this is silly.
All right.
It reminds me of Cinderella. You know,
help me there, Nick.
Help me there.
There's a missing slipper, but it only fits one person. And it seems like David had something that God was looking for that was the fit for the moment. You know, the other people, the other sons, were probably fine people, but the slipper only fit Cinderella. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's very interesting. That's very. What do y'all think about that? That this is the person for this time that's going to be important to what I have, my plans. Or what do y'all think about that? That's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That Cinderella analogy doesn't help me think of David in a good way.
Well, thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. Yeah.
He didn't go home in a pumpkin.
He was a good-looking boy, you know. So, you know, it's interesting because Samuel says to Jesse, he says, "Jesse, are these all your children?" Did Samuel have any doubts that God had told him where to go and what to do?
I don't think so, because he kept asking for more kids.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we learn about Samuel then, that he kept asking for more kids.
Well,
I think.
did God tell him? God told him that there was one of the sons, so he knew if he was believing God that there would be a son. So if it wasn't all of them, there must be another one.
Yeah, because in the introduction we said that God told Samuel, "I have reserved for myself a king among the sons of Jesse." You know, Samuel, when he first saw Eliab, he said, "This is the one. The Lord's anointed stands before him." Was Samuel right?
No.
Can prophets make mistakes?
Yeah.
They can make assumptions. He knew it was a son. He had that much right.
Well, it would have been more of a mistake if he went ahead and anointed him.
Oh, explain that to me, Joan. That's really interesting.
Oh, well, he didn't do that. So, I mean, I think that you would call, you know, label more as a mistake. But
okay.
I don't know.
So when Samuel says to Jesse, "Jesse, do you have any more sons?" How did that impact Jesse? What did Jesse say?
Like he was disappointed.
He did. Fine.
You think he was disappointed that his 7 strong, strapping sons were not chosen to be kings?
Well,
So.
I think that would be a
possibility.
So
confused, puzzled.
Confused. Go ahead and tell me that. What do you mean by that? Puzzled.
I think he would have thought God would certainly have picked one of those older sons. So it would be confusing to him that, you know, this is just a boy watching the sheep. He doesn't really amount to anything much. So that would be, he wouldn't think that would be who God would choose.
It is interesting that he said the youngest son is watching the sheep. doesn't even mention his name, which we had talked about. It's
hard to remember all their names.
Well, you've got 10. How many do you have, Joan? 8?
9.
9. Okay. Yeah, I guess I have 5. And how many of you go through the whole list of kids' names before you say the right one, right?
Throw the dog in there too.
Gosh. Oh my gosh.
When Jesse said to Samuel, the youngest is watching the sheep. And Samuel said, send for him because we won't sit down to eat until he comes. What was the impact on Samuel's life that he heard he had one more son?
That must be the one.
What do you mean by that? Help me understand that.
Well, the 7 have been rejected, so he's got only one more. So in his mind, this must be the one. That youngest one who's taking care of the sheep must be the one.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if David had been there, if they would have gone straight to him first.
Wow, that's a really interesting observation, Joan. I had never considered that. Go ahead and explain that a little bit more.
Well, I don't know. We don't know. But if they were all there, if Samuel then would have known that that was the one. I don't know that that's necessarily true.
Well, we don't know. And, it might have been that the Lord would have revealed that to him, or maybe not. Maybe the Lord would not have revealed that to him at the time.
This is not like an everyday occurrence that a prophet comes and says one of your sons is going to be king, right? I mean, right?
It's a bit of an understatement.
Yeah. So I would think it would be hard for Jesse to fathom that this was even happening, and in his human understanding, he would think it would be the oldest, strongest, and so I think it must have been kind of just a very unusual day for that family.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. Cheryl and then Angeline, I think you raised your hand too.
Well, maybe maybe the timing had to do with it too, because maybe he thought, well, there was no explanation about when, so maybe he's thinking, okay, soon, gonna be the king next year or in a couple of years. And so it was hard for him to imagine the youngest one being ready for that, but he didn't realize also, how much time was going to go by and all that. So maybe that was part of the reason why he didn't imagine it was the youngest one.
Thank you, Cheryl. Anyone else want to? Go ahead, Nate.
I just wonder if the whole exercise was as much a lesson for Samuel as it was the picking of the king.
Explain. That's a very interesting statement.
Well, as a prophet, he has to be able to, see, hear and understand what the Lord is driving at or wants. And unfortunately, we have a physical nature that tends to get in the way sometimes. So, the whole exercise with 7 rejections might have been as much a exercise for Samuel as it was an anointing of the king.
Wow, that is really interesting. What do y'all think about that? That is I had not heard that before, because that's very interesting. What do y'all think about that? And Angelina, you had lifted your hand up earlier too.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when Joan said it was a special day that a prophet was coming to your house to anoint the king, it doesn't seem like David was invited.
He was taking care of the sheep, as I recall.
And also they were gonna eat all together, and unless Samuel asked for him to be called, they were just gonna eat without him. Right?
Oh, that is really weird. No, that is as rude as you can get.
Well, somebody's got to take care of the sheep.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
He was the youngest, right? He was the youngest.
Probably the youngest one always did it.
The name was not mentioned, and he had the lowest job possible.
I guess they didn't have any servants.
Oh, Lilia, you mentioned you haven't spoken a lot, and you spoke up there, so go ahead and give us a little bit more on that.
I think, and I don't know how far of a stretch it is, but I mean, you have Saul, who was the wow and the obvious choice, and then he wasn't the one. Then you have David. The contrast between the two, the thing that keeps coming up to my mind is Gideon. And when they went out to battle, and the Lord took away and took away and took away. And then, because at the end of the day, it's not about David, it's about God.
Ooh,
And what he's going to do.
there. You can't go away with just that. You got to give us
well,
some more.
I mean, it's not his appearance, it's what God is going to do through him. And even thinking about that, you run down the lane and you know the whole Bathsheba thing. God knew that too. And he said, it doesn't matter. He's going to do the work. He's going to, I mean, that gives me, I don't know if I'm jumping too far to an application, but it's mind blowing that he knows everything. And he just says, he strips it all away. He's really the one that's going to do the work.
The stories about God. That's really interesting. The rest of the story goes that, the young man shows up and he's a good looking boy. And the Lord says, stand up, anoint him. He's the one. Samuel gets up, uses his horn of oil and anoints David in the middle of all of his brothers. And from that time on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David. And then Samuel got up and later on got up and went home to Ramah. Did Samuel give David a list of instructions?
Doesn't sound like it.
But he had the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, he gave him a spirit.
It was more than enough.
Because, I mean, he's a young man, a young boy perhaps, anointed to be king, and it's got to be a little bit confusing not to have any kind of instructions. And
there was already a king in place. Saul was already king.
Okay.
So, I mean, you're anointed to be king, but we already have a king. That to me, that suggests in the future at some point.
Even more confusing. It's got to be more
Yeah,
confusing.
really.
Alex, did you try to say something?
Steve.
Steve, did you try to say something?
I think it's something that's worth noting, the insignificance of David. Jesse showing off his most probable, handsome, largest, most capable son to be king. And I just think it's worth noting that David was a shadow of that which was to come, which was Christ. And Jesus comes, and the religious community was just waiting for this, this image on a white horse that was going to come and overthrow Rome and deliver them from the bondage of Rome and so on and so forth. But God sends his son Jesus, just such an insignificant person in the complexion in the course of just society. I think it's interesting that there's as Jesus is the fulfillment of the King of Israel, the fulfillment of him being Israel. I think it's interesting that he as well came as just a very, very common person, the son of a carpenter, and which was one of the largest stumbling blocks of the religious community. They just couldn't accept the fact that this son of a carpenter from Nazareth was the Messiah.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, there's just something interesting there. Jesus is the fulfillment of David.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think the prophecies say that he's the son of David.
Yes, certainly does.
Now, in this story, we saw that God did not choose the husky head and shoulders above everybody else guy, but chose what we would consider insignificant. Does God choose people with weaknesses today to do his will? What does it look like?
Like all 12 of his disciples, yes.
Yeah, okay. So what does it look like? I mean, his 12 disciples were chosen by him. What else does it look like for God to use insignificant or weak or what the world would consider useless people to do his will?
To make them strong.
Make them strong? Who said that?
And that the people can see the difference, that they were weak and now they are strong, that they could not speak and now they speak beautifully about God, about Christ, that they were, they will follow. They just followed the Jesus right away, yes, when he asked them, come and follow me. And they listen to God.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate that. Have you or someone you know, has God used your weakness or your inability to glorify his name somehow? And you'd like to share about that?
I want to say one other thing about
Sure,
the former question, that we're to come as children. We're to be like children before God. So.
And David was a young man, almost a boy, really. Yeah, thank you, Joan. I appreciate that. So, does anyone want to have a testimony about how God has used you or someone you know that's your weaknesses or your inabilities to glorify his name somehow?
I will.
Okay, go ahead, Lilia.
My son, both of my children are adopted. I am infertility in me. My son was diagnosed with CP. He was never supposed to walk. He just not a good diagnosis, and the Lord healed him. But he has some processing, I'm very light, but processing weaknesses, I should say, because it's not, if you didn't know him, you'd just think it was like a language confusion from going from culture to culture. He went from the Philippines to the United States to Mexico, all really young. And it's given him a certain humility, but I see the Lord preserving him because of those weaknesses, but also using him to glorify him. He's very humble, very respectful, and he loves to do worship and just whatever he can do to help. And he has a command of the word. It's not like I don't want to paint the wrong picture, but I believe that some of his beginnings have given him just the Lord works through him in ways that sometimes just blow me away, because he was never even supposed to be able to walk. And I think that's the way God does things.
Wow. So when you see your son, how old is your son?
He's 22.
22 now. Wow, you must be very proud of him. What does it make you feel when you see him doing things for God when he was not even supposed to walk or maybe not even talk?
I feel like it glorifies the Lord. Because it's not us. Everybody, they tease us. We've been on the mission field for 23 years, and everybody teases us and says he's the best missionary in the family, and he really is. But the Lord has done that.
Wow, praise the Lord for that, Lilia. When you, as over the years that you and your son and your family have been ministering together, and as you see the Lord using your son differently, how has that changed your life and changed your ministry?
There's nothing too big for God. There's nothing too big for God. There's nothing he can't do. And it, when we get discouraged and when we feel like with all this stuff happening right now, like just the same way the winds are blowing out here, the tide is shifting so fast, but he's in control. And I think that's what it does for me. It reminds me there's nothing he can't tackle.
Wow. Well, I have a question for everybody. Thank you so much, Lilia, for sharing that. That's a very, very close thing to your heart. And we appreciate you sharing with all of us that. Yes, go ahead, Ann. Yes, you can.
It's okay if I say, it's okay if I share now, Andrew?
Yes, it is, Ann. We'd love to hear your story.
Okay, well, I'm really glad to hear that story about the lady, adopting her son. And I was on the other end, and it's been a big hardship for me, but I think that good that's come out of it is that my nieces and nephews know how hard it's been for me to watch them grow up in that. And then I couldn't, raise my son. I see him now. I have a relationship with him now, but I couldn't see him for a long time. And my nieces and nephews, I think what it's caused in them is that they have mercy for those less fortunate. I think they have hearts of mercy for those less fortunate. Hopefully that will continue with the kids.
And did you give your son up for adoption?
I had to put my son up for adoption.
That must have been very hard for you.
It was a very hard thing, very difficult.
And
but he's doing great. He's a Christian now. He knows the Lord.
He was raised in a godly family?
Yes, he loves them. He thinks they're the best.
Wow. Well, that must give you great joy right now to know that he was raised in a godly family and
yes,
now
does.
you have a relationship with him. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Ann. Would anyone else like to share? Huh?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Would anyone else like to share about how in the future, God obviously uses weird circumstances to glorify his name. In the future, or today even, if we face a weird circumstance that obviously has a great weakness affecting us, how might this story help us?
Andrew, I'm sorry, I can't see anybody in, so I'm not sure if I'm stepping on anybody's toes to say something, but something that, not quite an answer to that question, but right at the beginning of the story, when Samuel thinks that Eliab is the one, it's encouraging to me to see that even a prophet of God can be mistaken. And yet the good side of that is that his relationship with God was close enough that he could hear from God and know that his choice was the wrong choice. So that's encouraging to me to know that a prophet of God can be wrong, but it's also an admonition to me that my walk with God would be close enough that I could hear from God and know that I'm wrong in something in a decision that I've made or am about to make.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. Maybe like going to Peru.
Yeah.
Alex and I got stuck in Peru for a while during the quarantine. So, thank you for sharing that, Alex. I appreciate that. Let's pray together, shall we? That we would never hesitate to do anything for God because we think we're weak or God is using a weak vessel, and God can do anything, right? I think we've learned that from this story.
Yes.
Lord, thank you so much that you use what the world rejects. And you don't need the big, the strong, the husky, the skilled. You use anyone. You use anyone or any donkey that gets in your way. And Lord, we pray that you would help use us to glorify your name as we trust in you. And everyone says, Amen.
Amen.